everyone. Happy Friday. I wanted to talk about Joe Biden and his relationship with China and how it has directly influenced our country for the worst today. Um, Back when he was a U.S. Senator, he spoke of transforming China through trade. As a presidential candidate 2 decades later, he denounces it as a dictatorship. So this goes back to a day in August when Biden made a trip to China and had some unusual meetings with China's Communist Party leaders. I just want to say whoever had the idea that this was some great voyage to go on, great idea to get involved with Communist Party, if the Democrats thought they were going to start having the upper hand. I understand some Republicans were on board somewhat with this too because it was a fairly new idea. Let this be a lesson, guys. You don't go make deals with the devil. And this is communist China. They don't mess around. So then, following at a lunch banquet, Mr. Biden and 3 other senators argued with Chinese officials about the O.J. Simpson trial and what it revealed about the integrity of our legal system, our U.S. legal system. And then when they met later, afterwards, with Party Secretary Jiang Zemin, they sparred over that more issues, but this time it was missile technology proliferation, human rights, and Taiwan. We know when it comes to human rights, technology, missile technology proliferation, and whatever else is going on in Taiwan. We know communist China, guys, is going to say one thing at a meeting, or they're going to suggest that they're going to follow the rules. They're going to be, they're going to be abiding with what's supposed to be done right. But you give these people, that's why they're communists. You give them an inch, they're going to take over your country. That's just how it works with these people. So, Biden didn't see the writing on the wall. And I just, my impression is he was thinking about the money he was going to be making, the bank rolling, and maybe leadership he would get as a result of this. Whatever kickbacks he was thinking. He really took down America with him and a bunch of idiots in the radical Democrat Party. So then it says Biden, leading his first overseas trip as the chairman of Senate Foreign Relations Committee, was also there in Bihadi in 2001 to help usher in an important era in American relationship with China. The building of a commercial link that would allow the communist nation entry into the World Trade Organization. When you have someone who is corrupt as Biden, and their life, what they do in their personal life is corrupt because he's a pedophile, these people will and deal with the scum of the earth because they really think that it's going to help each other out, and they're going to somehow make headway into having more control and power. And Biden getting bankrolled. And let me tell you guys, it never works out. It comes back to the old saying, don't make a deal with the devil. And, just like President Trump said, some way, shape, or form, you're always going to be compromised. And that's 100% true, guys. Remember that. It's 100% true. So, lo and behold, the United States welcomes the emergence of a prosperous integrated China on the global stage because, they expected this is going to be a China that plays by the rules. I know Biden knew they ain't going to play by the rules. I feel his agenda was corrupt to begin with, but this is kind of like how his way of like talking about it and seeming innocent, because he's not innocent. Biden, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing, let me tell you right now. So that's what Biden told Mr. Jiang, and this was recalled by Frank Januzzi, the Senate aide who organized the trip and took notes at Biden's side. So again, the United States welcomes the emergence of a prosperous, integrated China on the global stage because we expect this is going to be a China that's going to play by the rules, Mr. Biden told Mr. Jiang. And this is recalled and remembered by Frank Januzzi, the Senate aide who organized the trip and took notes as he sat alongside Biden. So we got crazy Biden talking crazy and believing it, even though in the back of his mind he knows better, but going with it. So the senator traveled days later to a dirt road village near the Great Wall. And this is 7,000 miles from Delaware, his adopted home state. Biden glad-handed, bemused locals like a candidate. He does use that charisma. Even taking Holy Communion from a Roman Catholic priest. This guy knows how to play the game. Let me tell you something. When you're willing and dealing with communists, you're not a real Catholic. Come on. And don't tell me you're a Catholic when you're a pedophile. I know he tried to lie in someone from Democratic side. I don't know what it was, but someone said he's an actual practicing Catholic. No, you're not. You're an actual practicing pedophile. I'm just going to say it, guys. And you're a communist pedophile. So then Biden, he returned to Washington, seeing more promise than peril, offering reporters the same message he had delivered to Chinese leaders. And he said to the reporters, the United States welcomed China's emergence as a great power because great powers adhere to international norms in the areas of non-proliferation, human rights, and trade. This guy was not only blowing smoke up his own, but he was blowing smoke up everyone else's too. Let's just get that straight, okay? This is how this guy lives his life. He believes crazy stuff. He hears it, and he believes it. On some level, he actually believes it. On another level, I know he knows it's crap. But this is the crazy guy that just goes with it. 2 decades later, China has emerged as a great power and, in the eyes of many Americans, a dangerous rival. Republicans and Democrats say it has exploited the global integration that Biden and many other officials supported. The 2020 election has been partly defined by much of what Washington sees as a kind of new Cold War. As Mr. Biden faces fierce campaign attacks from President Trump, his language on China points to a drastic shift in thinking. Mr. Biden calls Xi Jinping, the authoritarian Chinese leader, a thug. He has threatened, if elected, to impose swift economic sanctions if China tries to silence American citizens and companies. The United States does not need to get tough on China. He wrote this winter in an essay to Foreign Affairs. Mr. Biden now sees the country as a top strategic challenge, according to interviews with more than a dozen of his advertisers and foreign policy associates. Mr. Biden's 20-year road from wary optimism to condemnation while still straining for some cooperation is emblematic, symbolic of the arc of U.S.-China relations, which have deteriorated to an unstable, potentially explosive state. But as Mr. Trump denounces what he describes as failures by the Washington establishment on China, Mr. Biden, an avatar of that establishment, is not recanting his past enthusiasm for engagement. So Biden isn't walking around honky-dory praising China, communist China. So in a foreign affairs essay in 2018, two former Obama administration officials who advised Biden, Kurt M. Campbell and L.I. Ratner, both Democratic and Republican administrations, had been guilty of fundamental policy missteps on China. Isn't it odd how the blind can just lead the blind off a cliff? And I just don't understand how someone doesn't say, excuse me, this is not a good idea, and here's why. Across the ideological spectrum we have in the U.S. foreign policy community, they've remained deeply invested in the expectations about China, about its approach to economics, domestic politics, secretary, global order, even as evidence against them has accumulated. The policies built on such expectations have failed to change China in the ways we intended or hoped. Listen, guys, when you got corruption at that level, we're talking about the most dangerous people on this earth. You're not going to teach these dogs new tricks. It's like, you know, the girl or the guy who gets a girlfriend or boyfriend who does drugs and is a drug addict, and you think you're going to change that person. And that drug addict has failed everybody in their life. When you take a gamble like this and you're representing the United States and you're a senator and you start messing with communist China, listen, someone at that point should have stepped in and said, listen, do your job, stay away from the communists, or else you're not going to be senator no more. But I guess that's just not the way things roll in D.C. or whatever the case may be. So while refraining from admitting fault in his previous views, Biden speaks these days not of transforming China, but of restoring the United States. And this is according to his policy statements and interviews with his aides. They say the United States must regain its role as leader of liberal values and economic innovation, and that will give Washington the standing to rally like-mindedness nations to constrain China. So Biden is just, they're hoping that people will wake up to China and what they're doing, rally together, and just zone China out, kind of overrun them in a way. So among Biden's priorities are building alliances and reasserting a global defense of democracy, which Mr. Trump has eroded. That's what they say. Mr. Biden's Build Back Better economic plan promotes investments in the United States industries and research, partly to compete with China. And he sees some areas where Washington and Beijing can cooperate. Climate change, health security, and non-proliferation. Non-proliferation. Come on, non-proliferation? You know, Biden must also believe in unicorns. I'm convinced at this point. This guy believes in unicorns. Remember, he's a pedophile. Pedophiles don't got their head straight. They're so corrupt to the core. They're going to make deals with just about anybody as long as they're getting bankrolled. It doesn't matter what happens to the people that they represent. And we can see this in California, all right? We can see this with Garcetti. We can see this with Newsom, all the way down, trickling down. Just rotten. So relations pretty much are at their lowest point since the reestablishment of formal ties in 1979. Chinese officials have accredited their authoritarian policies and Beijing's assertion of power in Hong Kong, the South China Sea, and elsewhere are seen in Washington as open defiance. While Trump administration hawks aim to set the two nations on a long-term course of confrontation, Mr. Trump himself facilitates wildly on China. He halted his damaging trade war this year, called Mr. Xi, or XI, a very, very good friend, and expressed much respect on Twitter. But Trump now talks angrily of China virus, referring to the coronavirus outbreak. So, listen, our president has to come in and save the world. And we still got Democrats raising hell with our president. And our president is the type of guy that tries to keep the peace, but he still takes care of business. So if he tweets something positive, so what? He's not the one that brought in these communists into the World Trade Organization. He's not the one, he's not the reason for the way the world is right now. It's Biden, it's the Democrats. And our president has every right to frown upon the coronavirus because it disrupted everything for our country and for our people and for the progress our president has been making for our country. So, yeah, our president has a mind and he has an opinion, and he backs everything up. And I just feel people have their priorities in the wrong area when they gotta, say, oh, well, this is negative. It's not negative. He's our president. He has an opinion about one thing, maybe with China, and when it comes to something else, he's gonna have maybe a different view. That's sensible. Mr. Biden calls for a steadier approach, but he also has no easy answers for how two superpowers with intertwined economics can deal with their ideological differences. Really? It took you 2 decades to figure that was going to be a problem. In an interview in May with the New York Times, he said he met with Mr. Xi repeatedly in 2011 and 2012 to try to figure out whether it was possible to have a competitive relationship with China without it being bellicose. A bellicose relationship, which means fighting and all that type of stuff, without it being a relationship based on force. Biden was up to no good, period. He doesn't want to admit that. You don't go into the devil's den and say, I want to make a deal with the devil, and I want it to be free of devilish consequences. Mr. Biden can't be trusted, as Hillary, as Obama. And the country needs to wake up and know this, because it's to our detriment if they don't. It's to each one of our detriments if they don't. Mr. Biden says he has a long interest in the evolving nature of the Chinese Communist Party. He has had a long interest in the evolving nature of the Chinese Communist Party. He admits this. From his first visit to the country as a kid in the Senate back in April of 1979 as part of the U.S. congressional delegation to the country since China's Communist Revolution in 1949. He met with the country's leader, Deng, which is D-E-N-G, Xiaoping, Xiaoping, who was then beginning to transform China's command economy with market reforms. Hosting Chinese officials as the vice president in May 2011, Mr. Biden recalled the trip fondly. While acknowledging a debate on the question, he said he believed then what I believe now, that a rising China is a positive development, not only for China, but for America and the world at large. You see how delusional this guy is? What I think is, my personal assessment on this is that he was probably Chinese in his past life. And he's just kind of fixated on that. And I think he's fixated also on the power and how he could be a part of it. But anyways, as the country boomed over the decades, Mr. Biden was also a frequent critic, especially on human rights. It just seems like that's what these politicians do. They're going to be way over here on the left side, but then they're going to try to envelope it with this nice ribbon by talking about something completely opposite end of the spectrum and embracing that and saying, because we embrace this, all this other crap is going to be okay. It makes it right. No, I'm so sick of that rhetoric. And let me tell you, these politicians are real good with it. And this is what gets us in trouble, folks. When we sugarcoat stuff and we don't look at it for what it is. And these politicians, over and over, it seems like that's all they do for their own personal interest. So in 1989, outraged by the crackdown against protesters around Tiananmen Square, he introduced legislation to create a federally funded news media network to promote democratic values within the country. Biden realized China was a brutal system, said James P. Rubkin, a Senate Foreign Relations Committee aide who later served as State Department spokesman. The station went online in 1996 as Radio Free Asia and operates to this day. Mr. Biden also saw limits to what the United States could Mr. Biden also saw limits to what the United States could realistically demand. In 1991, as Congress debated granting China favored nation trading status, he acknowledged the country had reprehensible record on human rights and unfair trade practices. See what I'm talking about? The comment I just said before I read this? But then he argued that the top priority for the United States was China's sale of missiles to Iran and Syria, which could threaten Israel. By the end of the decade, Republicans and a growing number of moderate Democrats were extolling the benefits of freer trade with China. When the Senate debated in September 2000 whether to end 20 years of annual reviews of China's status and permanently normalize trade, paving the way for the country's entry into the World Trade Organization, Biden was a strong supporter. Like many others in Congress, Biden argued that China's global integration might influence the structure of their internal social, economic, and political systems. Permanently normalize trade, he said on Senate floor, continues a process of careful engagement designed to encourage China's development as a productive, responsible member of the world community. Mr. Biden also predicted that Delaware's chemicals and poultry industries would benefit, as well as General Motors and Chrysler, both of which operated major plants in the state. So I'm going to go over that one more time. Like many others in Congress, Biden argued that China's global integration might influence the structure of their internal social, economic, and political systems. Permanently normalized trade, he said on the Senate floor, continues a process of careful engagement designed to encourage China's development as a productive, responsible member of the world community. Mr. Biden also predicted that Delaware's chemical and poultry industries would benefit as well as General Motors and Chrysler, both of which operated major plants in the state. So here he is, Biden. He's touting his feathers of insanity. He's touting his rhetoric of insanity, of unicorns. On September 9th, 2000, the Senate approved the measure. It was 83 to 15. As in the House, much of the modest opposition centered on China's record on human rights and workers' rights. So, you have some people who are believing into the unicorn story, that unicorns exist, that you can make a deal with the devil. And the opposition in that voting measure, the 15 that opposed to the 83 that approved, or 83 to 15, the 15 centered on human rights and workers' rights. They have a record of not giving a damn about those things. And it just shocks me that 83 approved to 15. Mr. Trump, thank you for our president, now calls China's entry into the World Trade Organization one of the greatest geopolitical and economical disasters in world history. Oh, and he's right. And we are so ever thankful that our president is genius enough to call the situation what it is, guys. Because Biden is taking America and flushing it down the communist toilet. But support for China's membership was widespread at the time, including in corporations and the Republican Party, and excluding the world's most populous nation from the international trade system might have led to worse outcomes, some analysts say. So some analysts say if the Chinese didn't get involved, it could have led to worse outcomes anyways. I beg to differ. However, Chad Brown, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, said that if China had not joined the World Trade Organization, the United States could have still lost manufacturing jobs to other countries as global trade and automation increased. You know, you could say whatever you want. He goes on to say, quote, "It's not obvious to me that if China hadn't been allowed in, that things would have developed in the U.S. differently," he said. Um, the United States also exacted a heavy price for China's membership, far higher than any other country that had joined the group thus far. China was forced to lower its tariffs, alter thousands of laws and regulations, and adopt policies to open up markets. But over the decades, China disappointed hopes for a broader transformation. State-owned enterprises strengthened their control of strategic industries. Officials coerced technology transfer from foreign companies or outright stole corporate secrets. And the Communist Party limited the development of an independent judiciary. As its economy became greater and stronger, China's political system became less free. I'm going to say that again. Over the decades, China disappointed hopes for a broader transformation. State-owned enterprises strengthened their control of strategic industries. Officials coerced technology transfer from foreign companies or outright stole corporate secrets. And the Communist Party limited the development of an independent judiciary. As its economy became stronger, sadly, China's political system became less free. Some state Democrats say President George W. Bush neglected China during a crucial period. As Beijing pushed forward with its economic opening, Mr. Bush, along with most American policymakers, including Biden, remained consumed with the Middle East and Afghanistan after the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. Many American companies and consumers did benefit from the trade, but in parts of the country, especially in the industrial states that helped elect Mr. Trump in 2016, shuttered factories and exported jobs produced fury at Beijing and Washington.